Ngugi, we have the great pleasure of publishing an extract from your memoir, Dreams in a Time of War, in the next issue of Granta. And I wanted to speak to you a little bit about what it was like growing up in rural Kenya. You were born in 1938, thereabouts,
Yes, yeah, roughly,
to a
yeah,
very,
19,
very large family. Tell
yes.
us a little bit about your family and who it was
Uh,
made up of.
yes, I was born in 1938 in the shadow of the Second World War, born in Kenya. My family was quite big. My father had four wives, so I'm the fifth child of the third wife of my father. Some of my brothers went to the Second World War. One was killed there, another one survived the war. So as we grew up we used to talk about not so much the details of the war, but our brothers' relationship to that particular war because we had a particular interest. But one thing which I found very, very interesting for me is how events far away from a rural outpost could still affect that outpost very directly.
This is a really vivid account of childhood, and it's one that's full of stories. But I think the most central relationship is the relationship you have with your mother. And as you say, there were four wives, and you refer to all of them as mother. But your mother, especially, did something that had a huge impact on your life. And this was when she decided she's going to send you to school.
In terms of education, I'm entirely my mother's doing. Okay, I have the idea of education, but it's only inside me. I don't think that we could afford it, you know. So I never asked her whether I can go to school or not. But she was able to sell some of her surplus in the market. And that's how she was able to pay for my school fees at the time. But I started working very early as a kid. I can't remember. I tell my children today, I cannot remember a time in my life when I didn't actually work. So coming to awareness, my awareness working in other people's fields, picking tea or picking perennial flowers, to supplement whatever income my mother was able to make. Yeah.
Ngugi, as well as telling us about your childhood, this is a book that struck me as one that's full of stories and of the love of language.
The first wife, Wangari, uh, was the one who was the storyteller. And it was around or in her heart that we'd all gather in the evenings and so on. And other people in the village, sometimes young people would also come. So the evenings at her place was literally a kind of literally teach in for everybody. That's why stories were swapped. I mean, fictional stories as well as anecdotes. Stories of what's happening, in Kenya, what's happening in the world. That's how we came to know about so many other things. They may not have been sort of straightforward, sort of factual things about what was happening. It was a mixture of rumor, exaggeration. There's always an element of truth, But what they did was, for a child, it was exciting my imagination, making it curious and so on. And that happened around the fireside.
For many readers around the world of my generation, and certainly for African readers, our reading begins with you and with Chinua Achebe and with Wole Soyinka. And I just wanted to hear a little bit from you about what's been called a new generation of African writing, and writers such as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Brian Chikwava, Chris Abani, and writers like that. And I'd just love to hear from you what you think of the work they're doing and all the different places they're coming from and the different voices they're writing in.
In a way, the new generation, they are like our children, both in a literal sense and also in a literally sense. So it's very wonderful to see them coming into being. And one thing I've noted is that they are, I think, more confident in assuming the world, even when they base their work in Africa, but generally they are quite, I think, free in taking the world as their own, so I think they are not as hesitant as some others might have been, for instance, setting their works in England or in America, The only thing I take issues with them, and I keep on talking about it, I've not seen so far, I may be wrong, a young writer or the new generation who take a positive stand for and on behalf of African languages.
The issue of language has always been really important in your work, and you've spoken and written extensively about the need for people to write in their mother tongue, and you yourself will write in Kikuyu and translate your work. And I just wondered, just following on from my last question, do you think that this is something that's viable and indeed necessary for young writers today? And if we can just talk a little bit about what you see as the benefits.
It's necessary, it's viable. But to be very honest, they face very difficult choices. There are no publishers publishing in African languages, or there are very few, if any. Yeah? Some government policies are anti-African languages anyway. So if there's no publisher, therefore there's no reader, and because there's no reader, there's no publisher willing to invest, as it becomes a vicious circle, And for young writers, or for any writer for that matter, you do not want to write and put your product in a shelf. You write in order to be published, in order to be known, to be visible, and so on. And if you write in an African language, your manuscript may be in the shelf for quite a long time. Look at prizes given to promote African writing. Very good, I have no quarrel with them, but they all assume that African writing is only that which is in English. And they assume that European languages are the beginning, or they're the only means by which the African imagination can work. And it's not true.
Dreams in a Time of War is published next spring in 2010, I believe. When can we expect the next 2 volumes of the memoir?
I'm working on right now actually, I'm in the middle of the 2nd volume. Because what I'm trying to do in my memoirs is not just to tell factual story, which is true, of what happens, but I want people to feel, how did it feel like to live in what I now call concentration villages. Because really what happened was terrible in Kenya at that time. That the colonial state, of course, whatever the British state, they did something which today would actually horrify any nation. They dislocated a whole population from the traditional homes or wherever they lived into literally concentration villages. I write about this in both memoirs, but just now I'm in the middle of the 2nd memoir. And the 3rd memoir I hope will be about my college days in Uganda and so on. Again, I tell my story against the unfolding story of political anti-colonial resistance, and also, quite frankly, what is happening in the world, because I'm interested in the interactions of the personal, the regional, the national, and the international.